establish that this is a safe space for everybody, and we're here in good faith, and I think it's going to be a really great conversation. And with that, I am going to ask Jael to give the synopsis for those of you. I think a lot of people have read the book, but for those who haven't, maybe just give us the lay of the land and what we should know about it, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. This is really exciting. It's my first time in like a small, intimate group talking about the book, and that's really a special kind of dynamic that I've been missing. So I'm really grateful that we get to do it here first. And yeah, so Gutter Child, I started writing it right after I finished Stone Thrower. And so it was very much in response to some of the research I had done on my dad's life about growing up in the 60s in the States. And I was particularly, I was particularly struck by a question about women and what happens when women grow up in a world that's designed for their failure. You know, what kind of choices do you make? So the story centers around the life of Elamina Madeleine Dubois, and she is 14 at the start of the novel. And the imagined world is the mainland and the gutter. There's also a location known as the Hill that's referenced. And so the premise of the story is that she's 14. She's got a scar on her hand. That means she's a gutter child. But when she arrives at Livingstone Academy, she's been raised on the mainland by a mainland woman, and she arrives at this academy and discovers other gutter children, and they have two scars on their hands. And so she has to try and figure out what's the difference between her and them. Why is it different? What happened? And one of the things pretty early on is that in addition to having scars on their hands, they have a debt that's been gutter folks have debt that's been passed on generation to generation. And so they're at this school to kind of figure out how to pay off this debt. And so those are the two kind of main premises. Elamina is also part of a special project you discover early on as well. So that's why she has the one scar. And so her goal through most of the novel is to figure out what she's going to do about this world that she wasn't quite fully aware of and is now coming to understand more fully.
Great. And so your purpose of when you started writing it, I know it took a while to emerge and finished it literally last year.
Yeah.
Did you have a goal, a purpose? Like, what did you want to convey through the story about these issues? Like they're really, you could even call it like a current event, current issues book.
Yeah, the question for me was this. Well, somebody described it recently as like a sociological experiment. And I think that's kind of what I was doing. I had this question about what happens when a world's designed for your failure. And it came from my dad talking about the Trayvon Martin case. Trayvon Martin was a young man who had his hood up and had iced tea and Skittles and was shot on his way home by George Zimmerman. And when George Zimmerman got off and was acquitted, my dad said, of course he got off. The law is designed to protect someone like George Zimmerman. It's not designed to protect Trayvon Martin. And I just started thinking about laws and constitutions and how they're designed and how systems are built and who builds them and who they're built for. And I was thinking in particular about the US Constitution and the founding fathers that we always reference, and that those founding fathers were all white men who were settlers who had taken land from indigenous folks and decided that they need to build a system that was better than the British system that they had come from, and that they constructed it to protect themselves and their property and to protect it from anyone who wasn't like them. They weren't thinking about women very much at the time, unless it was their women that were like in their possession. They certainly weren't thinking about people of color. And so I wanted to create a world in which I did that, where I built a system and then I tossed characters into that system. And then I tried to figure out what kinds of choices would they make, and why, and when, and how ultimately would they get out of this system, was initially what I sort of set out to do. How do you navigate a world that's designed for your failure, and how do you get out of it? Um, and while working on it, I realized, when you build a system well, you don't just build the first part of it well, you build it to protect itself along the way. That's sort of how systems are designed. Even when they made amendments to the Constitution, it was just, in many cases, to reinforce it and make it stronger. And so it just gets harder and harder in some ways. And so that was really my predicament, is what happens? What do you do? And like, ultimately the question was, what message am I giving people? I did think about that a lot, especially last year, coming into April and working on the last scenes amidst the chaos. I was really like, well, what am I giving people? What am I telling people about the world in this book? Now that I've arrived at the end. And that was some hard stuff to take in. And then there's a note at the beginning of the book that I put in there specifically because I got to the end and thought, shit, this is not, this is tough. Like, this is, when you build the system and you put people in it that are disadvantaged, it's not easy to realistically tear it down and to realistically do that in a short time frame. And I should maybe warn people that it could be tough.
Even though it's fiction,
Mm-hmm.
but it's tough, but the world is tough. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you're really, it is fantastical in that way, but it's pretty, there's a lot of parallels you
Yeah.
can draw.
Yeah.
So well, thank you for doing that too, in such a way that I mean, that's the job of fiction, is to um see things from another person's point of view. So
Mm.
a white woman reading what it's like for this 14-year-old Black girl. You
Mm-hmm.
don't say Black, but it's,
Mm-hmm.
it's implied.
Yeah.
And I think you really do an excellent job of that. And I know um, it's tagged as advanced YA.
Mm-hmm.
And I read
Oh,
somewhere that you, is that correct?
I don't know. I'm like,
Oh,
I write books and someone else decides which part of the bookstore they go in. I have no idea.
well, I did read in an article, you said you wanted the idea to be complex, but the language to be accessible.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah. And yeah, that was, I think, at the time, because it's only my second long form book, I was sort of like, this is what I'm writing. She's 14. Of course, this is the language. But more and more, even Stone Thrower, I feel very uh, it's very important to me to have accessible books and accessible text. That seems, I think, is going to be my style, my jam. I don't think I'm going to be dealing in like high literary language. It doesn't come naturally to me. Not speaking, but especially in writing. And I was listening to Suvankam Thamavangsa recently, and she said, talking about her short story collection, and she was like, How to Pronounce Knife, which won the Giller. She said, I wanted it to be something that a 4-year-old could read, but also someone with a PhD could read. And that when you write simple or simple language, you can't hide things as much. And it actually have to be more particular, more precise in some ways. And so, that really, I started to think about the fact that one of my favorite things about Gutter Child right now is when parents say, I'm going to give it to my daughter or my son after I'm done, or we're reading it together. I had a friend and her mom were reading it like chapter by chapter together and then calling each other. And to me, I think that's the joy of storytelling. And so I think that will always kind of be my style. I think I'll probably always hover on the border of like new adult is what some people call it. I think that's just me.
yeah. And so it's a woman protagonist, young
Mm-hmm.
woman.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, this is a group of, it's the Feminist Enterprise Commons,
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of change makers, status quo pushers, and people fighting for all those equitable rights. Can you tell us what role feminism played
Yeah.
in the shaping of it?
Yeah, that was at the heart of it, because one of the things that really troubled me when I was working on the documentary with my dad, we went to his hometown and we ran into this young man who was the same age as me in the same projects where my dad grew up. And the young man was like, "Hey, Chuck, you know my mom, you guys lived a few doors down from each other." And I looked at him and I thought, wow, you're still living in the place my dad grew up. And this is my first time coming here. This is a whole other world, class wise, geography, all of it was so different from everything I had ever known growing up. And I realized, his mother and my father had very different opportunities made available to them, had very different resources available to them. And that along the way, and my agent said this at one time when we were talking about, there was a question, when you're building a world, you have to think of all these different pieces. And part of it was what happens when a girl has a baby, because what happens to women and their children in any world says a lot about the conditions of that world. And so that became a really important question that I had to grapple with on multiple levels, not just, if a character gets pregnant, what happens, but also like why and what's the backstory and how have we gotten to this? And that obviously becomes a big part of it. And for me, there's sort of three main young female characters: Elamina, Josephine, and Violet. And each of them makes different choices for very different reasons. And that was important to me as well, to kind of explore the different ways that women navigate this world, what choices are available to them, what obstacles they come across. I mean, the fact that they're often channeled into these certain kinds of jobs, and those jobs will pay them less, and that their debt will always take them longer to pay off than the men, I think is very true to the kind of world we live in right now. And it's interesting to see it play out so practically, right? Like when they get hired, to just see like, that's an extra 5-10 years of working just because you're a woman, or just because you were only trained in this kind of work, or only believed to be able to do this kind of work. So there's a lot of that, I think, in the story, is looking at the position of women and the kinds of decisions that affect women in particular. It's probably far more interested in what was happening to all the women characters, Ida, Lulabelle, all of them, than the men. There is certainly more women than men in the story for that reason.
Mm-hmm. And the setup for failure, like you say, it's not far from what we're living, from what we have been living. There's been incremental changes over the years, but I guess in an imagining the world that's set up for failure, what did you want to come out of that? Like, was there hope at the end of it, or was there is there change? Is it unfixable? Why isn't it happening faster?
Yeah, I mean, my editor and I had a whole long discussion specifically about hope. At one point she was like, "I feel like we need to talk about hope. I feel like we want to give people hope at the end of the story." And I was like, and this is like not maybe like a year ago, or no, I guess almost 2 years ago. Now, what is time? And she kept pressing this question, which I think is a normal editorial question. And I could not understand. I literally got off our call and was like, hope? Do I have to give people hope? Is that something that I'm obligated to do? Because I don't think I am. And then it became this larger question about, she's a white woman. As a Black woman, is it different? Like, is she looking for something in this story that just isn't there and shouldn't be there? And ultimately, I found there were sort of three options for how to carry the story out, and certainly how to wrap it up. I could be pessimistic. I could be optimistic, in which I think hope is kind of tied into a kind of optimism, or I could be realistic, in which case I'm not really sure where hope fits in. And I chose realistic. I have been surprised at where I ended up in the book, and where it goes and where it finishes. That's not where I planned. There was actually an epilogue at one point that wrapped things up quite neatly. And about 2 weeks before it was supposed to go to print, I said I would like to take the epilogue out. And my editor was not as excited as I was about this. I was really angry about what was going on in the world. And I just felt I was not ready to tie things up neatly. And I did not feel obligated to tie things up neatly. And I felt like that was the most honest place. Every time I read it and I got to the end, I felt like dropped, like I felt like a punch a bit at the end, and then I would turn the page into the epilogue and it was like it felt like a whole different book. And so I just was like, yeah, take it out. And she was like, oh gosh, let me read it over and get back to you. Like we had to have a bit of a pause about it. But I think ultimately I am not very confident that systems are easy, or it's maybe, I'm not even confident it's possible to tear systems down, to be quite honest. At this point in my life, I'm kind of like, I think we can change systems. I think we can amend them and modify them, but I think systems are quite intense. And to tear them down and build something new in their place is very difficult. And if it's possible, it will definitely take a long time. It'll get torn down in pieces and bits and reconstructed in pieces and bits too. So that's my kind of depressing, sad thing that I've been looking around. I've been looking at the education system and the justice system and, politics. And I keep thinking, in order to tear it down, the people in power and the people at the top would have to be willing to acknowledge that they're built on lies and falsehoods, and that they're willing humbly to take it all apart and give it to all of us to help them build up. Like that's how equity would really happen. And so I don't see signs that that could happen. I mean, I think what we've been watching with Trump and politics in the States is just like, we have Biden and that's great. It's better, but like, nobody's really going to fix how voting works in America anytime in the next few years. And so like, that's a system that builds a system that's flawed, right? You can't change the political system there if you can't change how people vote and how people contribute to the ideas that happen there. So all this is a bunch of my rambling thoughts on depressing. Can systems change? I don't know. I don't think so. But I will say, to put a little hope spin on it, I have found that I was interviewing Colson Whitehead maybe 3 years ago, or two, I don't know. And he said books can't change the world. And I was like, what? That's not true. And I think he's wrong. It was really a moment for me where I was like, I think you, smart man who's won Pulitzer, is wrong. And because I think a single book can change a single person, and a single person can change their network and their community and their space and their family. And that family can go on to change their community, and that community can go on to change. And so there is a ripple effect that happens with books and stories. And so I think for me, I've started to try and avoid getting overwhelmed by systems and to start focusing on circles and community. And that's a lot of what happens in the novel as well. Elamina finding community and really pulling herself in to spaces and people where she feels welcome and safe and like she can learn. That is what I'm more interested in now.
And that's a fantastic answer. And that's a way to deal with it, deal with the overwhelm, right?
Yeah.
Because it is, not great on so many levels.
Yeah.
In just to switch gears a little bit, your other work, your anti-oppression work, like that, and the teaching, are you using the book to propel that, or and how's it going, and what are you seeing? What kind of, is the dial moving at all, or what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the book has been out for about a month, and there's a number of school boards that are teaching it or are looking to teach it and add it to their curriculum. HarperCollins has put together, commissioned some teachers to create a really amazing educator guide that's coming out in the next few days. And so they're using it as a tool for discussing anti-racism and how to actively engage in anti-racism. But what's great is, and I did an event on Sunday with English teachers. What's great that I'm really interested in talking about even more fully is how to change the system of English literature, and like what's being taught in classes and how assignments are shaped and how storytelling is talked about and discussed. So I hope that I love the fact that the book might be taught in classes. I think that's really cool, because I was thinking about a young person as I was writing it who's not aware of the world and needs kind of books to show them, like, there are signs in front of you that are going to show you the world is messed up and that it's not what you think it is, right? You're going to learn about, oh, Canada's great, blah, blah, blah. Then you're going to get into certain grade, and they're going to tell you about the residential school system. And you're going to be like, what? And you're going to start to realize that this nation that you worship and these flags that you hold up and you brag about and you sing about is actually a foundation built on genocide. And like, you're going to start to put that together. And so what do you do with that? So I love the idea that this book can be that kind of discussion, and that more than that, we can kind of push the conversation about, what are they reading in classes? I'm a big fan of taking Shakespeare out for now, forever, and also integrating the school system with more practical storytelling and storytelling development, as opposed to, we talked a lot about the 5-paragraph essay and how dumb it is on Sunday, and how, my nephews have been, and my foster kids, like, spend all this time trying to build these ridiculous thesis statements, and then these 3 paragraphs where they compare Marxism to a novel, to Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, and they're just supposed to put that all together. Like, they don't even know what those words mean. And just trying to get down to, like, what are these stories saying? What do you think about this? How does it, those kinds of things. So I hope that the book can be used both as a storytelling lesson, but also to break down some of the systems that I think are really failing young people, because I want young people to be reading when they're 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 and 60 and 70, or listening to audiobooks, whatever they want to do, whichever they want to do. And I think there are a lot of people in my age category that are not reading because high school kind of killed it for them. And so that's kind of my secret plan, my mission, my undercover mission.
Good. Well, undercover, not so undercover.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things I'll say too is Livingstone Academy, the beginning setting for the story. A lot of people see connections to the residential school system, but really, for me, it was a connection to the colonization in general. Because I think in many countries, the Caribbean, Africa, America, the school system has done similar kind of atrocities to the Black community in particular. But also, it's also a commentary on today's education system and the ways kids can be streamed in one direction or another, and kind of led to believe that this is all they're capable of, or kept from other kinds of jobs, or just channeled into jobs that require degrees or whatever, this certain kind of path, this one path towards a success that's really, my husband always says, school trains us for the workforce. And that's not necessarily what everybody needs to do. He's a lifelong entrepreneur. And so, how do we train kids to be entrepreneurs and to be savvy entrepreneurs? And what about our school system isn't allowing for that kind of thinking and training and development? So, so I think part of Livingstone Academy is also about talking about the kind of narrow paths that we can sometimes create for young people today.
Well, to add to that, like artists, for example, we
Yes.
don't teach the value of exactly what you're doing. You
Yeah.
wrote this book, like, in addition to a full-time job,
Yeah.
and like many, many writers do, the value on art isn't there
Yeah.
like trades or economists or
Yeah. Yeah. There's just not a range, I think. I felt like we all knew we could be doctors, lawyers, dentists, teachers. That was pretty much all I could list off by the time I was going off to university. I'm like, well, I guess I'll be one of those one day. Um, so that's part of it. And it's also to think about rules and how rules can sort of inhibit the learning process. I think Livingstone Academy and the gutter system in general is filled with rules, and those rules make it very difficult for the kids to survive in a way that's meaningful. And so that's a lot about what I was thinking about too, is how to sort of get people thinking about the fact of like, I remember Catherine Hernandez talks about when she had her theater and kids would get off the bus and teachers would say right away, take your hat off, pull your pants up, and sort of correct the way they were dressed, because that's, you should look proper and you should do this in this particular way. And they had to actually send messages out to teachers to say, your kids can come exactly as they are, in their muddy shoes, in their, whatever they're wearing, however they want to wear it, that's how they can sit in this theater. We want them to know that they're welcome as they are. And so part of what I was thinking about with the rules too is like how rules tie people down.
yeah, and there's lines in there like the dialogue sometimes between characters where it's like, well, they can't do that. Well, yes, they can.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just shut down. Like the other person just shuts it down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that places like that just struck me like, yeah, we're here even in our system, that's flawed. And in many ways, there are so many barriers,
Yeah.
and then women and racialized people, like it's just layer upon layer upon layer. So here's the thing, you're this book is out there. Let's say the TDSB and beyond picks it up and they're teaching it, and these kids grow up, and the system slowly over time is going to change. Like it's going to take a long time, but art has facilitated that. Do you think?
I think that it's possible that one kid is going to read the book and that this book might make them want to become a writer, and that there could be very slow ripple effect. I don't know about something like mystical and magical and big. But I do think in every one of the things with teaching, I think, and I say this because my sister's a teacher, my brother's a teacher, and I taught at a college for a while. Teachers tend to have had this similar kind of experience in school. They did really well. They were regularly affirmed for doing well, and they went to university with decent grades. They did well in university, and then they went to teachers college, and then they went back, either because it was a natural fit or because they always felt inspired and they wanted to do that same kind of inspiration. And so it is hard, and my sister talks about this a lot, for them to imagine other kids finding a path to success that's maybe different, or understanding what that might look like for a kid who's a bit messy in high school, like doesn't submit assignments on time all the time, or who maybe doesn't even seem to like school. Like the fact that there are different ways to move into a successful adult life that don't look exactly like the way many teachers moved through school. And that what I would love to see, I would love it if a kid read Gutter Child and saw themselves in story, or was really inspired and was a bit messy, and then found themselves in teachers college and was that person that said, look, I was not that great of a student, but I read this book. And that's kind of, I think, what I hope happens. I hope more people are inspired by stories, mine or others, and see a way to be involved in systems that haven't included them in the past, or that have seemed exclusive to them in the past. And that might be education. It might be politics. I think politics is filled with people who have a similar kind of path as well. And as a result, similar kinds of peoples make decisions, for example, about transit when they've never taken transit in their life. So there's all these things that we one of the things I've learned from Fold is that diversity is just the best thing ever. And it takes a long time to get things done when you have so many different voices around the table, but it's always better in the end. And so that's even part of Gutter Child, is these different kinds of soci people, these different kinds of soci characters that have come about their process in life differently, right? Some are living in the gutter, and some are out at academies, and some are angry that they're at an academy, and some are satisfied that they're at academy. And making sure we understand that that diversity in any community and then amongst communities is how change will happen best. And so that's, I think, what I'm really interested in seeing happen. When I was building the world, I think I was very much interested in like all the different kinds of people and positions in life and how they might operate within this world. Like, you know, the people in the Hill and the people in Riverside, there's all these different communities that are being shaped by the system. And the question isn't for me, who's the good guy and who's the bad guy? It's about like, why do people make choices, and why do other people make different choices? And what makes each of those things different or important to pay attention to?